the 100-year-old secret that ruined a billion-dollar development. Welcome to the Story Vault. We have an unbelievable story for you today that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Imagine a family's legacy, an 80-acre property passed down for 4 generations, suddenly under attack by a giant developer. For Jake Thompson, his great-grandfather's dream of preserving their family land was about to be shattered when bulldozers started tearing through it. But what the developers didn't know was that Jake's great-grandfather, William, had put in place a legal provision 100 years ago, ensuring that anyone who tried to build on their land without permission would automatically lose their improvements. Jake faced endless obstacles as Summit Estates ignored his protests, dismissing him with a cold legal team and a fake claim to his property. Yet Jake didn't rush into a legal battle. He waited. Patience became his weapon. The more homes they built, the more they stood to lose. Each new foundation, every completed home was another piece of his inheritance, but he had to let it all unfold. After months of waiting, the moment arrived when all 156 homes were built, and Jake was ready to reveal the truth. What happens when corporate greed meets a century-old trap? Watch as Jake turns this developer's mistake into his family's victory. Trust us, this story will have you shocked and inspired. Don't forget to hit subscribe and join the Story Vault for more unbelievable real-life tales coming your way tomorrow. Jake Thompson sat quietly on the porch, gazing out over the sprawling 200-acre property that had been in his family for over a century. The land, a cherished legacy, had been passed down through 4 generations, and Jake felt the weight of its history pressing gently on his shoulders. It all began in 1920 when his great-grandfather, William Thompson, worked tirelessly, holding down 3 jobs to afford this piece of land. William had a vision, a dream of owning something of his own, something that could be passed down to future generations. Every early morning and late night he spent laboring was a step closer to realizing that dream. After William's passing, the land was handed down to Jake's grandfather and then to his father, each generation adding to the story, preserving the traditions and memories that were rooted in the soil. The land became more than just dirt and trees. It was a symbol of perseverance, sacrifice, and family pride. Jake grew up running through the fields, listening to stories from his father about the struggles of the past, about how each crop, each season, was a reminder of how hard they fought to keep the land. Now, as the 4th generation to inherit the property, Jake stood at the threshold of a new chapter. He wasn't just the owner, he was the guardian of a legacy built on the back-breaking work of his ancestors. As he walked along the familiar dirt paths, the land seemed to whisper its history to him, of long summers spent working the fields, of laughter echoing from the barn, of quiet evenings watching the sun set over the hills. This was more than just land. It was a living memory, a testament to his family's resilience and determination. Jake often thought about how his great-grandfather would have felt knowing the land was still in the family, still thriving. He could almost hear William's voice in the wind, urging him to protect it, to honor it. The legacy of the Thompson land wasn't just about ownership. It was about preserving a part of history, keeping alive the spirit of hard work and the bond that tied the Thompson family together, generation after generation. For Jake, this land wasn't just a place. It was home. Jake's morning routine had always been peaceful, a quiet reflection on the land that had shaped his life. As he sipped his coffee on the porch, the familiar sounds of birds chirping and wind rustling through the trees calmed his thoughts. But today, something was different. The steady rumbling in the distance pierced the calm, drawing his attention toward the eastern section of his property. His heart sank as he stood and walked toward the noise, his feet heavy on the familiar dirt paths. What he saw next sent a chill down his spine. Bulldozers, their massive yellow machines rumbling like thunder, tore into the earth, destroying the land that had been in his family for generations. They plowed through the ground with a relentless force, carving out plots for what appeared to be new homes. He couldn't believe his eyes. His first instinct was to run, to confront whoever was behind this violation of his family's legacy. The land he loved was being altered, taken apart, piece by piece. As Jake jogged down toward the destruction, he spotted a woman overseeing the operation. She wore a tailored blue suit, the kind of attire that spoke of authority, yet her demeanor was cold and dismissive. When he reached her, he demanded answers. "What's happening here?" Jake's voice trembled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The woman, unfazed by his presence, glanced up at him as though his intrusion was an inconvenience. "This isn't your land, sir," she said calmly, her tone sharp as if rehearsed. "This property was approved for development by Summit Estates. We have all the necessary permits." Jake's blood ran cold. "I'm Jake Thompson. My family has owned this land for over 100 years, he said, his voice growing firm. "There must be some mistake." Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she pulled out a tablet, tapping through it with ease. "According to county records, this eastern section was classified as abandoned property. We've followed all legal procedures for the Oak Ridge community expansion." She showed him a survey map, one that clearly outlined the land she claimed was abandoned, though it sliced through nearly 30 acres of his family's property. "This is impossible," Jake shouted, his voice shaking. "I have the original deed at home. This land has always been Harrington property." Rachel's smile turned colder, if that was possible. "Our paperwork says differently." "If you have concerns, feel free to contact our legal department." She shrugged nonchalantly. "But I should warn you, we have a team of 15 attorneys who specialize in property law. This development is moving forward regardless." Her dismissive tone lingered in the air as she turned away, walking off without so much as a second glance. Jake stood frozen, watching as the bulldozers continued their relentless destruction. The truth hit him hard. The land he thought was protected, the land his ancestors had fought for, was now in danger. It wasn't just an attack on his property, it was an assault on his family's history. Yet something deep inside him refused to give in to the overwhelming sense of helplessness. He wasn't going to let this stand. As the machines moved forward, Jake knew he had to fight. But what could he do against a well-funded corporation with a legal team ready to bulldoze through his rights? He couldn't stand idly by. He had to find a way to protect what was rightfully his. And somewhere deep down, he knew the fight wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. The next few days were a blur of frustration and confusion. Jake had never imagined that the peaceful land his family had worked so hard to protect would come under threat in such a brutal and bureaucratic way. The sight of the bulldozers had left him shaken, but the real challenge lay in the aftermath. Armed with nothing more than the deed to his land, Jake began to navigate a bureaucratic labyrinth that seemed designed to wear him down. Jake's first move was to contact the county assessor's office, hoping to get some clarity. The clerk on the other end of the line, however, offered no help, only a dry explanation that the property lines had been adjusted during a regional survey conducted the year before. "Notices were sent to affected parties," she said, almost dismissively. "Maybe your mail got lost." Jake clenched his jaw, barely holding back his anger. How could such an important change to his property rights be handled so carelessly? Undeterred, he moved on to the building inspector's office, where he was met with similar indifference. "All permits are in order," the official stated flatly, barely glancing up from his computer screen. When Jake asked why he wasn't notified of the changes, the answer was simple and disheartening. Westview submitted everything directly. You might want to hire a surveyor if you dispute the boundaries. Frustrated, Jake reached out to 3 different property attorneys, hoping for some legal insight into the situation. But each one told him the same thing. Westview's legal team was known for being ruthless, and even if he pursued a case, he could expect years of litigation and a mountain of legal fees with no guarantee of winning. The threat of being buried under legal costs seemed too much to bear. The more he heard, the more it seemed like there was no hope of winning. Westview Estates had every angle covered. As Jake stood on the ridge, watching the bulldozers continue their relentless work, his mind raced with questions. Was there truly no way to stop this? Had his family's land been lost forever to corporate greed? He felt powerless. Each day, the construction continued at an alarming pace, with homes rising from the earth like mushrooms after a storm. Within 2 weeks, the frames for the first dozen homes were already up, and there was nothing Jake could do to stop it. But then, as he sat in his office that evening, surrounded by family photos and the sound of his father's old rocking chair creaking in the corner, a thought occurred to him, something his father had once mentioned. The deed to the land, the one that had been passed down to him, was special. His great-grandfather had been paranoid about losing the property to developers, so he'd built safeguards into it. Jake's pulse quickened. Could this deed hold the key to saving his land? With a renewed sense of purpose, Jake pulled the deed from its protective sleeve and began to read through the dense legal text, hoping to find something, anything that could help him stop the destruction. Hours passed. The pages yellowed with age, but eventually he found it. A provision, buried deep in the legal language, but unmistakable in its clarity. Any construction on the land without the owner's written consent would immediately transfer ownership of the improvements to the rightful owner. Jake's hands trembled as he reread the provision. His great-grandfather had indeed foreseen this day, a legal trap set in place to protect the family's land from exactly this kind of corporate takeover. The more Jake thought about it, the more he realized the genius behind it. If Westview had indeed built on his property without permission, every single house they constructed would automatically belong to him. For the first time in days, Jake allowed himself to breathe, a sense of clarity cutting through the fog of uncertainty. This was his chance, his family's legacy, his great-grandfather's foresight, and the land itself were all now protected by a provision that could turn the tide in his favor. With this new knowledge, he was no longer the helpless observer of a nightmare. He was ready to fight back. Jake could hardly believe what he had uncovered. The deed, tucked away for years in a leather-bound folder, held the key to everything. He had spent days frantically researching, desperately trying to find a way to stop the bulldozers and the rapid construction encroaching on his family's land. But now, as the provision in the deed became clear to him, a wave of relief washed over him. It was as if his great-grandfather had known, even before he had passed, that one day someone would try to steal the land. And in his wisdom, William Thompson had set a brilliant trap. The provision was as simple as it was powerful. It stated that any improvements made to the land without the express written consent of the rightful owner would automatically become the property of that owner. Jake's mind raced as he realized the implications. Every house that Westview Estates built, every structure they erected, would legally belong to him. No questions asked, no negotiations needed. The moment the first house was completed, it would be his, and the more they built, the more they would lose. With newfound clarity, Jake knew he had a decision to make. The provision was legally binding, of that he was certain. But did he act immediately and halt the construction, or did he let Westview dig its own grave? The thought of stepping in right away was tempting. He could stop them before they got too far, recoup some of the damages, and restore his land. But then, Jake remembered what Thomas Green, the elderly attorney who had been his father's friend, had advised him. After reviewing the deed and confirming its validity, Thomas had smiled, a knowing glint in his eye. "You could stop them now, Jake, but the real reward lies in patience." Jake had listened, though it was difficult. "Let them build," Thomas had said. "The more they build, the more they lose." "If you wait until all 156 homes are finished, it will be the most expensive mistake Summit Estates ever made." It took all of Jake's strength to hold back. The bulldozers continued their work, day after day, as the construction accelerated. Jake stood on the ridge every morning, watching the foundations being poured, the frames going up, all while knowing that each new house was a piece of his inheritance. His great-grandfather had protected this land with more than just foresight. He had created a trap so brilliant that it would ultimately save everything. But it wouldn't be easy to wait. The temptation to act, to stop the destruction, was nearly overwhelming. But Jake understood the bigger picture. The more homes Summit built, the greater the loss they would face. As the weeks passed, the stakes grew higher. The first homes were nearing completion, and already the prices of these new properties were being advertised, $450,000 each. It was at this moment that Jake's patience was truly tested. He knew he had to wait. His family's legacy, the future of his land, depended on it. And so, with a quiet determination, Jake stood firm, knowing that justice would come, but only when the time was right. As the days turned into weeks, Jake felt the weight of his decision pressing heavily on him. Each morning he watched from the ridge as Summit Estates made astonishing progress, their workers pouring foundations, erecting walls, and completing the framework of homes that would soon be sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The temptation to intervene grew stronger with every passing day. It felt like a punch in the gut to see the land his ancestors had fought so hard to protect transformed into something unrecognizable. But Jake held fast to his father's advice, remembering the legal provision buried deep in the deed, the provision that would turn everything around. The thought of letting Summit Estates build their entire community, knowing that every structure would eventually belong to him, was difficult to stomach. Watching the bulldozers tear through his land, hearing the constant hum of construction, was maddening. Yet Jake understood the brilliance of his great-grandfather's foresight. He wasn't just protecting the land, he was setting a trap, one that would allow Jake to reclaim not just his family's property, but also a significant financial windfall. Jake's patience, though, was being tested like never before. The homes were being completed at an astonishing rate. Within 2 weeks, the first dozen homes were already framed, with more quickly following behind. The sight of people moving in, families settling into homes that were supposed to be his, stirred an uncomfortable feeling in Jake's stomach. These weren't just strangers. They were innocent people, unaware of the land dispute, starting new lives in houses built on stolen land. Jake couldn't help but wonder how much longer he could stay silent. As the homes neared completion, Jake turned to his attorneys, seeking further confirmation that the legal provision in the deed would hold up in court. They reassured him that the provision was sound, that it had never been challenged, and that it remained fully enforceable. Yet with each passing day, Jake's dilemma grew more complex. Should he step in now and stop the construction, sparing the families from the potential fallout? Or should he wait, allowing the development to proceed, knowing that the end result would be far greater? By now, the first homes were already being advertised for sale, priced at an eye-watering $450,000 each.
This was no longer just about land. It was about setting a precedent, making sure that no developer would ever again try to take advantage of a family like his. Jake's moral compass wavered. The idea of causing such disruption for the innocent families who had already purchased homes weighed on him heavily. He knew, however, that if he acted too soon, he would lose the full benefit of his great-grandfather's carefully laid plan. It was then that Jake realized the truth. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge wasn't in stopping the enemy, but in letting them overextend themselves, watching as their greed turned into their own downfall. He would wait. Every new home, every new family that moved in only made the mistake bigger. Jake didn't need to rush. Justice was already on his side. He just had to be patient. As Jake stood on the ridge that overlooked the construction site, a sense of quiet satisfaction began to settle over him. The process was slow, agonizingly so, but Jake knew that every new home that rose on his land was another piece of his inheritance, another step toward reclaiming what had been taken from him. The first dozen homes were now framed and had already been listed for sale at $450,000 apiece. Each day, more progress was made. Each new foundation poured felt like another victory for him, even if he couldn't yet claim it. Despite the growing unease in his gut over the families moving into homes they didn't know were built on stolen land, Jake stuck to his plan. His patience, once difficult to summon, had now become his greatest ally. He understood the magnitude of the situation. The larger Summit estates built, the greater their loss would be. It wasn't just about money. This was about setting a precedent, showing the world that there were consequences to corporate greed, especially when it came to trampling over family history. His great-grandfather's brilliant provision had created an irrefutable legal claim. Jake wasn't just fighting for land, he was fighting for justice. And in this battle, he wasn't going to rush. But with each new house completed, the stakes felt higher. The construction site was no longer just a field of bulldozers and hard hats. It was a fully functioning neighborhood with streets paved and utilities installed. The first homeowners were moving in, setting up Christmas lights, planting lawns, and living their lives in homes that were never meant to be theirs. Jake had hoped that he would feel a sense of triumph, a sense of vindication as the construction continued, but instead, a heaviness settled in his chest. He could have stopped it at any moment, he knew that. He could have marched down there, waved his deed in front of Summit Estates, and put a halt to the entire development. But then, where would that have left him? The legal battle would have been drawn out and the outcome uncertain. It would have been messy, costly, and emotionally draining. What's more, the people moving in would have been left in the lurch, innocent victims of a battle they knew nothing about. No, Jake realized, he had to let it unfold.
By letting Summit Estates build, Jake was ensuring that the stakes would be high enough to make this a catastrophic mistake for the company. It wasn't about taking the land back right away. It was about making the cost of their greed undeniable. The bigger the development, the bigger the loss. When the time came, when all 156 homes were completed and the community had grown, the mistake would be so massive that Westview Estates would have no choice but to negotiate. And that, Jake knew, would be the moment of reckoning. Patience was no longer just a virtue. It was his weapon. As the bulldozers continued their relentless work, Jake knew that soon, very soon, the tide would turn in his favor. As the months dragged on, Jake's patience was finally starting to pay off. The construction had progressed at an alarming pace, with the first 30 homes now completed and over 50 more well underway. The sound of hammers, drills, and trucks became a daily soundtrack to Jake's life. He'd long since stopped counting the number of homes that had been framed or sold. Each day, the development grew closer to completion, each new house only cementing the fact that Jake's great-grandfather's legal trap was about to spring. The sheer scale of the development now seemed almost overwhelming. 156 homes, an entire community built on his family's land. The most difficult part, Jake realized, was watching the process unfold and doing nothing. He had been patient for months, waiting for the right moment to act. And every time he stood at the ridge, watching the workers complete the foundations or the roofs, the idea of stepping in and stopping the construction became harder to ignore. But his instincts, honed by years of watching his father fight battles and his great-grandfather's wisdom, told him that waiting was the right move. He wasn't going to stop them now. The more Westview built, the more they stood to lose. If he had stepped in at the beginning, it would have been a small loss for them, easily absorbed. But now, with the development nearly finished, the costs would be enormous. The financial implications for Summit Estates were massive. They had invested millions of dollars into the project, and every house they built brought them closer to losing everything. Jake's legal team had confirmed it again and again. The provision in the deed was airtight. But there was a moral dilemma, one that kept gnawing at him as he watched families begin to move into their new homes. These were innocent people, families just looking for a place to live, not knowing that they were moving into homes built on stolen land. Jake hated the thought of causing them hardship. They didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of a corporate battle. Yet, he knew that if he didn't let this unfold, the consequences for Westview wouldn't be as significant. He had to let the mistake become big enough that it couldn't be ignored. The disruption to people's lives would be the catalyst for change. Finally, as Christmas decorations began to appear on homes and the first families settled in, Jake made a decision. He would wait until the entire development was complete. It was the hardest decision he'd made in months, but it was the only one that made sense. The more homes they built, the more they would lose. And when the time came, when all 156 homes were completed and sold, the costs would be catastrophic for Summit Estates. It would be a mistake they would never recover from. Jake knew that waiting would make all the difference. The land, his family's legacy, would soon be his again, and the payoff would be worth every agonizing moment of patience. As the construction continued, Jake held steady, knowing that the best revenge was not in stopping the development but in letting it unfold into the costly disaster it was destined to be. The waiting game had reached its final stage. Jake had watched patiently as Summit Estates continued its aggressive construction, unaware of the trap his great-grandfather had set.
By now, the first 30 homes were completed, with another 50 in progress, and the prices were being advertised for upwards of $450,000 each. The community was starting to take shape. New streets lined with freshly paved asphalt, utility lines snaking through the earth, and rows of homes that were becoming a fixture in the once familiar landscape. To Jake, it felt like an invasion. But each new home, every family that moved in, was also another step closer to the moment he had been waiting for. The dilemma weighed heavily on Jake's heart. The families, the innocent people moving in, had no idea what they were walking into. They were looking for new beginnings, for homes where they could raise their children and make memories. Jake could only imagine what it would feel like to be one of them, oblivious to the fact that they were living on stolen land. It wasn't lost on him that these people didn't deserve the fallout of a corporate greed war. But at the same time, Jake had a responsibility to his family's legacy. He couldn't afford to stop now, not when everything his ancestors had fought for was at stake. The truth was, the longer he let the development proceed, the bigger the stakes became. Summit Estates had made a critical error, one they hadn't seen coming. Every home they built, every piece of infrastructure they added, would soon be his by law. The provision in the deed was as brilliant as it was simple. His great-grandfather's foresight had turned what could have been a devastating loss into a monumental opportunity. Jake knew this, and as painful as it was to watch innocent families move into the homes, he understood that there was more at play here than just personal revenge. The time for action would come, but not yet. Jake had already invested months of his life in waiting. He had documented everything, every detail of the construction process, every interaction, every new home. He even hired additional legal help, confirming again and again that the provision in the deed was legally binding and unchallengeable. And so, Jake bided his time, knowing that the payoff would be more than just financial. It would be justice served. Finally, as the holiday season approached and the first residents began to settle into their new homes, Jake decided it was time to act. The development was nearly complete, and with each house that was finished, Summit Estates lost more and more. They had no idea that they were about to suffer the consequences of their greed. Jake wasn't just getting back his family's land. He was about to turn their mistake into something meaningful. It was a victory that had been 100 years in the making. And when the time came, it would be more than just a financial windfall. It would be a lesson that would reverberate far beyond Oak Ridge. The day Jake had been patiently waiting for had finally arrived. The construction was complete. Summit Estates had finished all 156 homes, and the new community was full of new residents, some unaware, others optimistic about their future in their freshly built homes. Jake stood at the ridge, staring down at what had once been his family's peaceful land, now transformed into a bustling neighborhood. The houses, the streets, the amenities, everything that had been built without his consent was about to become his by law. The realization hit him with a bittersweet feeling. His great-grandfather's brilliant legal provision had worked. The legal battle he had feared so much had never truly materialized. The more Westview built, the more they stood to lose. Now, standing on the ridge with the whole neighborhood below him, Jake felt a sense of justice brewing. It wasn't just about the money, though the financial payoff was undeniably huge. This was about sending a message. It was about proving that even the biggest developers couldn't trample over the rights of a family that had fought to keep their legacy intact. The construction might have been rapid, but the cost would be even greater now that it was complete. Jake's mind raced as he prepared to take action. His legal team had confirmed that the provision in the deed was unchallengeable and legally binding. Summit Estates had made a grave mistake, and it was time for them to face the consequences. He had already gathered everything he needed: the original deed, the attorney's opinions, the surveyor's reports, and all the documentation he'd meticulously collected over the months. He was ready to confront Rachel Williams, the executive from Summit Estates, who had dismissed his concerns with such arrogance when they first met. It wasn't just about taking back the land, it was about righting the wrongs done to his family and proving that patience, when exercised correctly, could lead to the sweetest of victories. Jake had watched them build for months, seen the workers pour foundations, lay bricks, and build homes, all while knowing that it would all eventually belong to him. The process had been long, painful, and emotionally draining, but Jake had known that it would be worth it. And now, as the grand opening ceremony for the development approached, Jake knew the time had come to act. Summit Estates might have thought they were building a future, but in reality, they were building their own downfall. At the ceremony, as Rachel proudly presented the new community, Jake would reveal the truth to everyone, summoning not just legal clarity, but the moral victory his family deserved. Every home that stood there would soon belong to him, and Westview Estates would learn the cost of their hubris. Jake was about to claim the victory that had been written into his family's history, a victory he had patiently waited for, and now it was finally his. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this incredible journey of patience and justice. Have you ever faced a situation where waiting for the right moment turned out to be the best decision? Maybe you've had to stand by while others made mistakes, knowing that the truth would eventually come to light. Share your experiences with us in the comments below. Do you think Jake's decision to wait for Summit Estates to finish building before taking action was the right move? Or would you have acted sooner? How would you have handled the dilemma of watching innocent families unknowingly move into homes built on stolen land? Your comments mean a lot to us, and we want to know what you think. Let's start a conversation about justice, patience, and the unexpected ways things can work out when you trust in the bigger picture. Whether it's a story of personal triumph, a lesson learned, or a moment of revelation, we're excited to hear your perspective. Don't forget to share this video with others who might find inspiration in this story. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories that prove patience truly pays off. We can't wait to read your thoughts.